Have you noticed that most people want to change their lives, but almost no one actually does? And it's not because they lack talent, opportunity, or luck. The truth is much more painful and more liberating. Life only stops when you stop first. And no one has told you this honestly, because admitting it hurts. But it is precisely this pain that opens the doors to personal power. You've been trained to believe that you need motivation, the right moment, the perfect phase of life, to get started. This is a comfortable lie that keeps millions of people stuck in the same routine for years. Because, deep down, there's an uncomfortable truth that few accept. Life only changes when you lock yourself into a decision and throw away the key. That is the true lock-in. And before you think this is too radical, let me remind you of something. Radical is continuing to live a life you can no longer stand. Radical is repeating patterns that you swear you will abandon on Monday. Radical is expecting the world to reward you for actions you never took. There is nothing more dangerous than a life lived at half power. But there's a way out, and it's simpler than it seems. Simple, not easy. Simple because it all starts with a choice. Difficult because that choice requires something you've avoided your whole life. Total responsibility. From the moment you talk to yourself honestly, change is no longer a promise. It becomes inevitable. And that's why this audiobook exists. To provoke the kind of truth that no one talks about. To give you the kind of mindset that unlocks lives. And to show you, bluntly, how to take control of everything you've let slip through your fingers. Not with pretty speeches, but with a real, powerful, and practical mindset. If you're listening to this, it's because you feel, even if it's hidden, that you're ready for more. Ready to level up. Ready to live intensely what you once only dreamed of. And at this very moment, as your mind absorbs these words, you've already entered the process. Lock-in begins before you realize it has begun. Now, the question that will define the rest of your journey is simple. Are you going to listen to this audiobook as someone who consumes content, or as someone who decides to truly change their life? The answer is just beginning to emerge within you. The moment of decision always comes like a silent snap, that instant when a person realizes that they can no longer coast through life. It appears when the outside world has lost patience, and when the mind begins to demand relentless focus, so as not to get lost in the noise. It is at this moment that the first breath of self-discipline is born, the one that takes a person out of automatic mode. And even if they don't realize it yet, that breath is already the beginning of a profound identity shift. It all starts right here, when they decide to act without looking back. Most people don't realize that this moment is precious because it often comes disguised as discomfort. Sometimes it appears after harsh criticism, other times in the silence of the early morning, but always carrying a call for mental toughness. It's as if life were saying, either you change now, or you accept living the way you are. And when that call comes, the only possible response is consistent action, even if it's small. Small actions shape great destinies, and this is the first step for those who want to turn the game around without waiting for applause. This moment is also the dividing line between those who talk and those who do. Many people build huge castles in their heads, with plans, goals, and far-fetched ideas, but they don't put anything into practice. The decision comes precisely to break the cycle and reveal that relentless focus is about stopping fantasizing and starting to act. It is at this point that self-discipline begins to strengthen. Those who truly decide discover that, after the first step, the journey is already different, and the world moves for those who move. When the mind is scattered, life becomes heavy. But when a person chooses to focus, something changes internally, almost like turning on a power generator that has been idle for years. The decision creates a level of mental toughness that surprises even those who made it. They realize that they were waiting for the perfect moment, until they discovered that the perfect moment is born from imperfect action. This understanding creates an immediate identity shift. From here, consistent action ceases to be an obligation and becomes fuel. It is interesting to note how the decision does not require absolute courage. It only requires a thread of determination. Complete courage arises along the way, fueled by relentless focus on what matters. Often, people think they need to be confident to get started, but in fact, they gain confidence after they start. And it is the act of starting that unlocks dormant self-discipline. With that, mental toughness grows naturally. Soon they understand that deciding was the biggest investment of the day. The decision also acts like a light bulb turned on in a completely dark room. Before, everything seemed confusing, full of doubts and fears. But when a person chooses to act, the environment changes, and some things finally become clear. Relentless focus begins to guide her steps, while self-discipline holds back the urge to give up. And from that point on, an identity shift takes place, without her noticing. Today's small choices define who she will be tomorrow, and that is too powerful to be ignored. Those who truly decide immediately feel the weight of the world becoming lighter. This is because indecision consumes more energy than any difficult task. When they finally choose a path, they feel a different, almost spiritual relief. From then on, mental toughness ceases to be a distant idea and becomes a daily tool. They understand that consistent action is worth more than any momentary inspiration. Decision brings direction, and direction brings peace. Life always offers two paths, waiting and action. Waiting seems more comfortable, but it silently destroys. Action, on the other hand, although uncomfortable, creates movement, results, and real confidence. When a person accepts this, they awaken a relentless focus capable of completely changing their routine. Self-discipline becomes an invisible habit that sustains everything, and each step of consistent action is a declaration that they are taking control of who they want to become. Deciding also requires stepping out of the mental bubble where everything seems easier than it really is. The bubble is seductive because it promises effortless results, but never delivers anything. The decision breaks this illusion and brings the person into the real game. Here, mental toughness ceases to be a nice concept and becomes a necessity. From that moment on, identity shift begins to manifest itself in behavior. And it is this new behavior that paves the way for the next big step. When a person truly decides, they prove to themselves that they are tired of being a spectator in their own life. They realize that no one is going to show up to save them. This awareness hurts, but it is liberating. And it is this liberation that ignites relentless focus on what matters, not on what distracts. Self-discipline becomes a form of self-respect, and without realizing it, they begin to practice consistent action, creating a visible change that spreads to everything around them. This moment also requires brutal honesty. The person looks in the mirror and realizes that much of what they experience today is the result of past decisions, or the lack thereof. This has a strong impact, almost like a reality check. But it is precisely this shock that unleashes the mental toughness that was hidden. From then on, relentless focus ceases to be a desire and becomes a daily choice. And this commitment creates the first step towards a profound identity shift. Some people think that deciding is just choosing a goal, but it is much more than that. Deciding is cutting paths, closing doors, and taking risks. It is saying no to distractions that seem harmless but drain energy. This movement requires a solid level of self-discipline. It also requires mental toughness to deal with the consequences of the choice. And it requires relentless focus to not turn back. The decision shapes identity even before success arrives. An important detail about this moment is that it usually comes alone, without applause, without an audience, and without warning. It comes when the person is tired of hearing themselves complain, when they realize that repeating the same habits will only generate the same results. And that's where the initial identity shift is born. From then on, consistent action begins to be seen as the only way forward, and relentless focus emerges to prevent them from getting lost amid old temptations. The decision also reveals who is truly willing to grow, because deciding without acting is a beautiful but empty thought. When a person decides and acts, the world begins to respond. They notice signs, opportunities, and situations that previously went unnoticed. It's as if life becomes clearer, and this only happens because self-discipline has become their foundation. Mental toughness becomes protection against relapse. Consistent action becomes routine. And identity shift further deepens this transformation. This moment, though simple, changes destiny. Deciding is the first act of courage that opens the door to all others. When a person understands this, they stop waiting for motivation and start creating movement. This is where relentless focus solidifies, because they understand that dispersing energy means falling behind. Self-discipline becomes a tool for self-preservation. Mental toughness becomes a constant companion. And every action, no matter how small, reinforces the new path. And in the end, the decision always paves the way for something even greater. It is just the trigger, the initial awakening. After that comes responsibility, struggle, discipline, and everything else that builds a winner. And without realizing it, the person already begins to naturally move toward the next step in this journey, one that requires even more awareness, strength, and commitment than the decision itself. Taking responsibility for your own future is like finally taking the wheel after years of sitting in the back seat. You realize that there's no point in blaming traffic, fate, or the rain. Now you're the one who decides where to go. This awakening immediately activates relentless focus, because you can no longer let life run on autopilot. This is where true self-discipline is born, the kind that doesn't depend on motivation. From that point on, mental toughness grows naturally, because you understand that either you take control, or you will be controlled. Most people spend years waiting for someone to come and give them a push, when in fact no one is coming. No one is going to get up for them at 5 in the morning. No one is going to hand them discipline in a pretty envelope. No one is going to believe for them. This understanding generates a powerful identity shift, almost as if they realize that they always had the leading role, but didn't use it. When they take this on, consistent action ceases to be a burden and becomes a logical choice, and that choice begins to shape their new path. Responsibility also means stopping bargaining with excuses. A person may have come from a difficult background, but they need to understand one thing. The past explains, but it does not determine. When she accepts this, a relentless focus is born that is capable of cutting distractions at the root. Self-discipline becomes a form of self-respect, and this is where the scenario really changes. The person stops counting the reasons why they can't and starts doing what needs to be done. When they take responsibility, they realize that no one else will ever care for their dreams with the same dedication. This triggers a level of mental toughness that transforms weaknesses into strengths. They stop asking for permission to grow and start creating opportunities, even if they are small. This constant movement generates consistent action, and the more they move, the deeper their identity shift becomes. It's amazing how everything changes when a person changes. This process also reveals a hard truth. Responsibility weighs heavily, but it is the weight that strengthens. Just like at the gym, there's no growth with empty bars. People need to carry some emotional burdens, some sacrifices, and some difficult choices. However, each mental repetition creates relentless focus. Each sacrifice strengthens self-discipline. Each difficulty solves a piece of mental toughness. And all of this builds someone more prepared for what is to come. Responsibility for the future also involves daily choices that seem silly but shape everything. For example, going to bed early, reading a few minutes a day, choosing friends who lift you up. All of this is consistent action. If you're going to read, you can start with something simple like The Power of Habit or Mindset. If you're going to invest, you can study real estate funds or stocks from solid companies like WEG and Ito. These small decisions build a real identity shift, and that shift creates a life aligned with what the person says they want. From that moment on, they discover that taking responsibility is liberating. Instead of being stuck with what they can't control, they start investing energy in what depends on them. And interestingly, this reduces anxiety, increases focus, and brings mental clarity. Relentless focus emerges, putting everything into perspective. Self-discipline appears as a consequence, not as a painful effort, and each conscious act further strengthens their future. The future ceases to be a frightening mystery and becomes a construction. Those who understand this take on life as a project, not as improvisation. And every good project requires mental toughness to deal with unforeseen events, changes of course, and limitations. But it also requires consistent action, one brick at a time. And as a person builds, they undergo such a profound identity shift that they begin to see value where they once saw difficulty. Responsibility also means facing truths that most people avoid. For example, life owes nothing to anyone, and no one is special just for existing. This may seem harsh, but it is liberating because it puts control back in the right hands. This slap of reality activates relentless focus on what really matters. And when a person accepts this, self-discipline ceases to be a distant concept and becomes an intimate commitment. From there, the journey takes on a different pace. When a person takes charge of their own future, they learn to stop blaming the world for their delays. Blame delays more than any real obstacle. Responsibility, on the other hand, aligns everything. This alignment requires mental toughness to let old habits die. It also requires consistent action to build new ones. And when that happens, an identity shift takes hold. People begin to see solutions where they once saw walls. Responsibility is the filter that separates those who grow from those who stagnate. It takes people out of the role of victim and puts them in the role of author. This requires relentless focus to avoid returning to old patterns. It requires self-discipline to maintain habits that strengthen. And it requires mental toughness to continue even when everything seems stuck. But when they understand that the future is in their hands, something in their chest lights up and never goes out. Taking responsibility means understanding that no one will applaud you at first. The initial journey is silent, almost lonely. But it is precisely in this silence that power is born. You learn to trust your own word more than the opinions of others. And that strengthens your identity shift. Each firm step generates consistent action, and each sustained action increases relentless focus on what really matters. When they understand that the future depends on what they do today, stopping becomes too costly. They realize that every delay charges high interest, and every excuse steals a piece of tomorrow. That's why self-discipline becomes a tool for survival. Mental toughness becomes a shield against distractions. And consistent action becomes a bridge to what she wants to experience. Responsibility, then, ceases to be a burden and becomes a competitive advantage. Responsibility also awakens something curious. People begin to take pride in their own efforts. Not in the end result, but in the process, because they finally understand that they have done something for themselves. This healthy pride reinforces identity shift. It strengthens relentless focus. It keeps self-discipline alive. And it creates the courage to face things that once seemed impossible. This cycle is what differentiates those who try from those who achieve. And in the midst of this mature attitude, something inevitable begins to happen. She begins to attract opportunities, people, ideas, and paths that she did not see before. Responsibility creates openness for this. She becomes someone trustworthy, someone who does what she says, someone who inspires without realizing it. And naturally, she begins to realize that taking charge of her own future is only the first step, because soon comes the part where she will have to fight for it every day. Living in search of comfort is like sleeping on a mattress that is too soft. It feels good at first, but it makes you weak. People realize this when they understand that nothing great comes from the comfort zone. This understanding awakens the relentless focus that was dormant. To grow, you need a little friction. A little internal friction, and it is in this discomfort that self-discipline is strengthened. Growth is a high-impact sport, and only those who accept the blow can play. The struggle is the only path for those who want to build something solid. Those who try to escape it always return to the starting point, more tired and more frustrated. The struggle, however, gives you direction. It requires mental toughness to face bad days without losing pace. And as you move forward, the identity shift begins to happen. The struggle insists on shaping the new version of her, and that is inevitable. She changes faster when she stops protecting herself from discomfort. The comfort zone is a seductive place. Everything is easy, predictable, smooth. But this smoothness comes at a very high price: stagnation. The person who decides to fight discovers that nothing grows where everything is comfortable. They understand that consistent action is worth more than any fantasy of ease. With relentless focus, they begin to replace immediate pleasure with real progress. And that's how the struggle becomes an ally, not an enemy. When they begin to seek out the struggle, they discover something curious. Discomfort doesn't hurt as much as their imagination suggested. Often, what hurts is thinking too much. Acting hurts less. This discovery creates a more mature self-discipline. The person learns to get out of bed when they want to stay in, to study when no one is watching, to train when it seems difficult. This develops mental toughness, and this mental muscle changes everything. The struggle also forces the person to abandon justifications. They begin to take responsibility for mistakes, review attitudes, and face limitations head-on. It's uncomfortable, of course, but that's how you build a real identity shift. People realize that before, they sought comfort to escape their own failures. Now, they seek discomfort to overcome them. And every step along this path reinforces their relentless focus on what really matters. When they choose to fight, they learn that pain and progress are siblings. They always go together. Reading books like Anti-Fragile, for example, helps you understand why things that are under pressure tend to get stronger. You begin to see yourself this way. Anti-Fragile. You understand that consistent action, even with pain, generates solid results. And this clarity strengthens your self-discipline. The struggle no longer seems like punishment and becomes an investment. Comfort creates the illusion that everything is fine, even when it is not. The struggle, on the other hand, has the honesty to show exactly where the weaknesses lie. When people accept this, they grow in a more conscious way. They begin to make choices that require mental toughness, such as training even when tired or cutting out bad habits. And this process shapes their identity shift. It is living proof that discomfort is also affection, just in a raw version. The struggle shows that progress comes faster for those who stop hiding behind excuses. It requires the person to face their own complacency, something that many avoid for years. This confrontation creates relentless focus because they cannot afford to be distracted. Self-discipline becomes sharper, almost intuitive, and consistent action becomes part of the routine, no longer a sacrifice. They finally see that fighting is the shortest path to evolution. Discomfort has a strange power. It reveals who really wants to grow. Because anyone wants the result, few want the struggle. When a person embraces the struggle, they realize that it doesn't matter if they are slower or faster. What matters is that they are moving forward. This mindset creates a mental toughness that does not break easily. And this deepens the identity shift, transforming their entire behavior. There's no sustainable victory without this new self. When she commits to the struggle, she begins to live more intentionally. Every action has a purpose. Every choice has direction. They move away from people who love comfort zones and get closer to those who choose evolution. These exchanges strengthen their relentless focus. Self-discipline becomes contagious, and consistent action becomes a natural reflex. They finally understand why they say that discomfort builds character. The struggle also unlocks a confidence that comfort would never give. The person discovers that they are capable of enduring more than they imagined. This discovery has a powerful effect. It unlocks courage, and courage opens doors that fear kept locked. This internal change generates an identity shift that is noticeable even to those around her. And all of this was only possible because she chose to face discomfort instead of hiding from it. It's curious how, after struggling for a while, discomfort ceases to be frightening. It becomes a sign of progress, not danger. The person realizes that each uncomfortable step makes them stronger, and that increases their relentless focus. Self-discipline becomes easier, as if the body and mind are finally in sync. The struggle becomes routine, and routine becomes evolution. And evolution always leads to something even greater. The struggle also teaches people to think less about the result and more about the process. They understand that the process transforms them daily. Reading, training, waking up early, working hard, improving. All of this forms a powerful cycle. A cycle sustained by consistent action. When they realize this, they begin to honor the process. And this honor deepens their identity shift. The struggle shows that who they are becoming is more important than what they will achieve. For those who choose to evolve, the struggle becomes almost a ritual. It is no longer punishment, it is commitment. The person learns to draw strength from discomfort. She learns that mental toughness is not born of ease, but of pressure. She learns that relentless focus can only be maintained when she cuts out internal laziness. And she learns that self-discipline flourishes when it is required. The struggle becomes part of her identity, and that is extremely powerful. And as they continue to advance, they realize that this path requires even more courage to face not only external discomfort, but also internal discomfort. Sabotaging thoughts, old fears, deep insecurities. All of this appears in the midst of the struggle. And that is precisely where the journey to the next topic begins to be inevitable, leading the person to face something even more challenging than comfort, themselves. People who depend on motivation live as if they were waiting for a sunny day to leave the house, and that almost never works. Discipline, on the other hand, is different. It transcends the weather, moods, and excuses. When people understand that self-discipline is more powerful than motivation, their lives change. They start to take action even when they are tired, even when they don't feel like it. And it is this behavior that awakens the relentless focus that sustains any great victory. Motivation is unstable, coming and going like an unannounced visitor. But discipline is a permanent resident, staying there all the time, waiting for people to take responsibility. When they realize this, they activate a mental toughness that goes far beyond emotions. They begin to understand that their feelings are not always aligned with their goals. And because of this, consistent action becomes the rule. Life responds to those who show up, not to those who just feel. Discipline is that sincere friend who tells the truth without beating around the bush. Sometimes it bothers us, but it always helps. When a person chooses to discipline themselves instead of waiting to be motivated, they create a profound identity shift. They stop being someone who acts when they want to and become someone who acts because they need to. This simple shift in identity changes their habits, their rhythm, and especially their relationship with their own future. The world begins to take that person seriously. Motivation likes glamour, beautiful phrases, and impactful videos. Discipline likes routine. It likes waking up at the same time, training even when you feel lazy, studying even when no one is demanding it. And it is these repeated acts that create relentless focus. People realize that they don't need to feel like doing the right thing. They just need to start. The beginning activates movement. Movement generates clarity, and clarity generates strength. Most people wait for a feeling to act, but winners act to create the feeling. That is discipline. The person understands that phenomena happen after action, not before. Only those who practice consistent action discover this secret. Motivation is a consequence of the initial movement. This understanding strengthens self-discipline and creates a cycle of mental toughness, where progress becomes fuel. And that fuel never runs out. Discipline puts people on the path to inevitability. If they read 10 pages a day for a year, they end up reading 3,650 pages. If they train 30 minutes a day for a year, that's more than 180 hours of training. The world calls this a routine, but those who live it call it transformation. It is in this silent transformation that identity shift is born. And all this happens for one simple reason. Consistent action always wins over lack of motivation. Those who practice discipline realize that the less they think, the more they evolve. Overthinking is the enemy of action. The body knows what it needs to do, but the mind invents stories to complicate things. Discipline cuts through this internal dialogue. It creates relentless focus on what matters and silences emotional noise. And when that happens, people realize they were putting their entire lives in the hands of fleeting feelings. The secret is to understand that discipline does not have to be painful. It needs to be constant. People can make discipline light, human, and enjoyable. They can build simple rituals to maintain their rhythm, preparing workout clothes the night before, organizing their work environment, using anchor habits such as drinking a glass of water and getting started. These micro-gestures trigger consistent action, and over time, they create natural self-discipline. Motivation is a small flame. Discipline is the entire power plant. People who depend solely on motivation experience ups and downs, but when they rely on discipline, they create stability. This stability activates mental toughness because they learn to act even on the worst days. And it is precisely these days that most shape their identity shift. Growth begins when discipline takes the wheel. It's funny to notice that many people say, "I can't be disciplined," but they manage to be disciplined in bad habits, such as procrastinating, scrolling through feeds, sleeping late. Discipline exists, it's just directed in the wrong direction. When people understand this, they turn the key. This simple insight awakens relentless focus. And with that focus, they begin to redirect habits. Self-discipline is born from redirection, not perfection. Discipline is also about commitment to the future. It makes people act as if tomorrow depends on today, because it does. When they internalize this, they create a more serious relationship with time. They stop wasting hours on things that don't build anything. And this new attitude generates consistent action. People realize that every little action moves the needle of life. And this movement creates confidence. When people begin to apply discipline, they discover something surprising. Acting every day is easier than acting only when they feel motivated. Routine reduces mental effort. It transforms difficult actions into automatic ones. And this automation creates a powerful identity shift because people recognize themselves in the movement. They begin to believe in themselves, not because someone told them to, but because they see daily evidence of their own progress. Discipline also protects people from themselves. Protects them from what? From procrastination, excuses, emotional laziness. It acts as an internal bodyguard that says, "You asked for a better life. Then let's get to work." This type of dialogue strengthens mental toughness. And over time, it further strengthens relentless focus. People finally realize that discipline is an act of self-love. Another important point, discipline produces silent but visible results. People around you begin to notice the difference even before you do. They see a different posture, different energy, different consistency. This generates an external and internal identity shift. The world responds to discipline. It does not negotiate with motivation. It rewards consistent action. Those who act win. Those who wait waste time. And as discipline becomes part of one's identity, one discovers that one's life changes naturally. One stops waiting for feelings and starts building destiny. And it is at this very moment that the need for something even deeper arises, something that will require courage to face what many people avoid, internal discomfort. And it is this discomfort that leads directly to the next step in this journey. Accepting discomfort means understanding that growing up not only hurts, it needs to hurt. People realize this when they notice that everything worthwhile requires a little effort, sweat, and even frustration. This understanding gives rise to relentless focus, because they stop running from pain and start using it as a compass. Self-discipline comes into play when they learn to do what needs to be done even when they don't want to. And this constant practice creates a solid foundation for mental toughness. Discomfort reveals the kind of life each person will have. Those who run away from it live small. Those who face it expand. When someone decides to embrace discomfort, a powerful identity shift occurs. It's as if she says to herself, "I'm ready for the bigger version of me." And that changes everything. From then on, consistent action ceases to be a sacrifice and becomes a strategy. Discomfort becomes the door to something greater. It's curious that many want evolution without discomfort, like trying to get strong without lifting weights. It's impossible. Life works just like the gym. Without resistance, there is no growth. When people understand this, they begin to seek challenges instead of avoiding them. They learn to train even when tired, read even when busy, work even without inspiration. And these practices reinforce their relentless focus. Self-discipline grows in this hard soil. Accepting discomfort also changes a person's relationship with failure. Before, they saw failure as a sign of inability. Now, they see it as a necessary step. This requires mental toughness, because failing hurts, but teaching hurts more beautifully. And each failure analyzed generates smarter, consistent action. This cycle builds a solid identity shift. People understand that discomfort and wisdom always go hand in hand. Discomfort also teaches that there is no freedom without responsibility. Those who choose the easy path end up paying more later. Those who accept the difficult path today will live the easy path tomorrow. People who internalize this develop relentless focus on what really matters. They stop wasting time on distractions. And this clarity strengthens self-discipline. Accepting discomfort becomes an emotional investment. A simple example, waking up early. At first, it is uncomfortable. But over time, you realize that you gain extra hours of life. Another example, training even when you feel lazy. At first, it is painful. Then it becomes a habit. Life rewards those who overcome the initial discomfort. This creates automatic consistent action, and this automation deepens mental toughness. Small discomforts build greater versions of ourselves. Accepting discomfort also helps people stop romanticizing the journey. Growth is not poetic, it is practical. It requires difficult choices, uncomfortable conversations, internal changes. When people embrace this, relentless focus arises naturally. They come to understand that every uncomfortable moment is a chance to move forward, and this constant progress activates an identity shift that becomes noticeable even to those around them. Discomfort points to where the next level is. If it hurts, it's because it's expanding. If it bothers you, it's because it's shaping you. If it scares you, it's because it's transforming you. People who understand this learn to listen to discomfort as if it were a silent mentor. It points out weaknesses, repetitive patterns, neglected areas. And every time they face these points, their self-discipline grows stronger. Accepting discomfort also teaches you to deal with feelings without being a slave to them. You begin to act even when you feel fear, laziness, insecurity. This practice transforms turbulent emotions into stepping stones. The secret is to act. This is where consistent action changes everything. Because action generates progress, and progress generates confidence. This confidence fuels identity shift. And this shift changes the entire perception that people have about themselves. When they embrace discomfort, they discover that they are much stronger than they imagined. Because no one knows their own strength until they are tested. This constant testing builds mental toughness. People who don't shy away from discomfort end up becoming unshakable. They are not knocked down by small everyday problems. This kind of emotional strength begins with the simple habit of facing what everyone else avoids. Accepting discomfort creates a behavior that few develop, the habit of always seeking what expands. You start saying yes to challenges, no to distractions, and now to what you've been putting off for years. Relentless focus becomes automatic, and self-discipline becomes part of your identity. This is how consistent action is born every day. You no longer need to motivate yourself, you just do it. Accepting discomfort also frees you from the need for approval. They discover that evolving hurts even when no one sees it. They understand that growth isn't always beautiful on the outside, but it is precious on the inside. This understanding creates an authentic identity shift. They stop living to please and start living to evolve. Mental toughness grows as a result of this emotional independence. Discomfort also teaches that life is not about feeling good all the time. It's about feeling proud. Pride comes from effort, not comfort. The person realizes that the feeling of accomplishment is worth more than any momentary comfort, and that feeling fuels their relentless focus. They understand that immediate pleasure must be exchanged for lasting progress, and that exchange changes everything. When people accept discomfort, they begin to relate to limits in a curious way. They push a little harder every day. Limits cease to be barriers and become references. With each advance, no matter how small, they create consistent action, and this repeated action causes such a profound identity shift that they no longer recognize themselves in the old version, the one that used to run away from difficulty. And in the end, accepting discomfort ignites a different internal flame, the desire to grow even when no one is watching. This kind of strength rarely comes from comfort. It comes from pressure, challenges, and difficult choices. And it is precisely this strength that pushes people to the next step of their journey, where they discover that the greatest battle is not against the world, but against themselves. Becoming your best self starts with a simple realization. No one is born ready. Everyone is a work in progress that is refined over time, with effort and mature choices. When people understand this, they stop comparing themselves to others and start focusing on themselves. This shift awakens relentless focus, because now it's about personal growth, not external competition. And this specific focus already initiates a powerful identity shift. They start competing only with who they were yesterday. Being the best version requires people to honestly review their behaviors. There's no point in trying to improve without recognizing what is holding back their growth. This process of self-knowledge requires self-discipline. because facing one's own flaws is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. In doing so, she develops mental toughness, because each flaw she acknowledges becomes an opportunity to rebuild herself more efficiently. And this cycle creates constant progress. She realizes that evolution does not happen all at once, but in small upgrades. Reading 10 pages a day, training for 20 minutes, organizing her room, studying something new. All of this is consistent action. These are small efforts that accumulate into big transformations. The person understands that their best version is not created in epic moments, but in routine. This perception solidifies the identity shift. They begin to see themselves as someone capable of evolving daily. To achieve this superior version, it is necessary to make choices that the old self would never make. This means saying no to old habits, old distractions, and old automatic behaviors. This movement requires relentless focus to keep priorities alive. It also requires self-discipline to act even when you feel lazy. And over time, people realize that evolution requires more renunciation than addition. They begin to remove excesses from their lives. The best version of yourself is also directly linked to truth. Being honest with yourself is not easy, but it is liberating. When you admit that you could be doing more, that you are procrastinating or sabotaging your own progress, you open yourself up to change. This brings mental toughness, because taking internal responsibility is a form of growth. This honesty transforms identity shift into something visceral and consistent. Becoming better also requires people to take care of their references. If they consume superficial content, their thinking becomes superficial. If they hang out with lazy people, their pace slows down. But when they choose strong references, books like Atomic Habits, podcasts about development, videos that encourage consistent action, their minds change. This creates relentless focus on what matters, and evolution becomes inevitable. The best version is built through challenges. People realize that the more they expose themselves to discomfort, the more they grow. They begin to choose more difficult paths on purpose. Reading instead of scrolling through feeds, training instead of complaining, studying instead of procrastinating. Each of these choices strengthens self-discipline, and this repeated behavior increases their mental toughness. Evolution becomes a habit, not an isolated event. This process also teaches people to value progress over perfection. Being perfect is impossible. Improving 1% every day is entirely feasible. And that daily 1% creates a profound transformation over time. This mindset opens up an identity shift that changes everything. People recognize themselves as constantly evolving. With relentless focus, they stop demanding the impossible of themselves and start celebrating each advance. The best version requires people to forgive themselves for their mistakes, but not to repeat them. There's no point in seeking evolution while carrying excessive guilt. What works is responsibility plus consistent action. They learn to look at mistakes as information, not as a sentence. This attitude strengthens self-discipline because it keeps the mind clear and focused, and that deepens their mental toughness, making them more resilient to future challenges. Another important part of this process is understanding that the best version requires energy. You can't evolve by sleeping poorly, eating poorly, or living tired. When people start taking care of their own bodies, they realize that their relentless focus increases. They feel lighter, more awake, more intentional. This physical care fuels identity shift. They begin to see themselves as someone who honors their own temple. Being the best version also requires that people talk less about change and do more. They realize that speeches inspire for a few minutes, but actions transform for years. And the more they act, the more they develop consistent action. Self-discipline grows along with it. Mental toughness expands, and she begins to look at her old routine as something distant, almost unrecognizable. In this process of evolution, she also learns to choose environments that favor change. Messy places weaken focus. Organized places strengthen behavior. She begins to adjust her space, her desk, her room. Small details create relentless focus effortlessly, and that focus feeds the identity shift that is blossoming. Evolution begins in the external environment and is confirmed in the internal. Becoming better also requires that the person stop outsourcing their happiness. They understand that no one is responsible for their peace of mind, their discipline, or their results. This requires a high level of self-discipline, but it also creates emotional independence, something deeply linked to mental toughness. From there, growth no longer depends on the world and starts to depend on themselves. The best version emerges when the person finally understands that they are under construction and always will be. They begin to accept that they will never completely arrive, but they can always improve. This takes the pressure off and increases relentless focus in the process. The identity shift becomes permanent, not temporary. She begins to see evolution as a lifestyle, not as an end goal. And as she progresses, she realizes that her best version requires facing even greater internal battles. Because improving externally is difficult, but improving internally is another war. And that war takes her directly to the next step of the journey, where the battle is no longer against the world but against herself. The inner battle is that silent war that no one sees, but which decides absolutely everything. That is where doubts, fears, and inner voices arise, trying to sabotage progress. People begin to realize that their greatest struggle is not against the world, but against themselves. This awareness awakens relentless focus, because without focus, the mind becomes a minefield. And it is in the middle of this field that the self-discipline necessary to keep moving forward is born. This internal battle requires courage, because facing yourself is always more difficult than facing any external obstacle. When a person looks inward honestly, they find parts of themselves that they would rather hide. But it is precisely this contact that strengthens mental toughness. You understand that you cannot conquer the world if you do not conquer your own mind. And this understanding initiates a profound identity shift. The internal voices are insistent. Give up. Slow down. You don't need to today. No one cares. These phrases seem innocent, but they sabotage entire dreams. When a person decides not to obey these voices, they practice consistent action, even when they are not having their best day. This act of resistance strengthens relentless focus, and this focus opens space for a new mindset, one that is more mature and less reactive. The inner battle is also about dealing with thoughts that arrive uninvited. They come from past experiences, traumas, and limiting beliefs. People need to learn to filter, not to believe everything they think. Books like The Power of Now help a lot in this process. This practice of observing thoughts generates emotional self-discipline, and this discipline creates solid barriers against internal sabotage. Sometimes, people realize that their greatest enemy is not the fear of starting, but the fear of continuing. Continuing requires emotional strength and resilience, and this only comes from mental toughness. Every time a person chooses to continue, they weaken the old pattern that wanted to push them back, and this weakening generates a powerful identity shift. They begin to see themselves as someone who persists, not as someone who gives up. The inner battle also involves dealing with comparisons. The mind loves to compare the backstage of one's own life with the stage of others. People need to understand that this is an emotional trap. When they turn the focus to themselves, a relentless focus is born that eliminates external noise. They realize that their only real adversary is the previous version of themselves, and this strengthens the self-discipline necessary to continue growing. Another part of this battle is dealing with excessive self-criticism. People think that being hard on themselves will make them grow, but sometimes it just paralyzes them. They need to learn to correct themselves without punishing themselves. This emotional maturity reinforces mental toughness, and when they start treating themselves with more respect, they create an internal identity shift that transforms their attitude. Progress becomes more natural, less emotionally charged. The inner battle teaches that negative thoughts do not disappear. They weaken with practice. People need to act even when they are afraid, even when they have doubts, even when they are tired. The act of acting weakens negativity. This movement is consistent action in its purest form. And as the person moves forward, relentless focus strengthens. It is as if they learn to train their own mind to work with them, not against them. The more a person knows themselves, the more they learn to identify their own triggers for sabotage. Some triggers come from procrastination, others from insecurity, others from unrealistic expectations. When they identify these patterns, they can replace them. This creates emotional self-discipline. And with this discipline, mental toughness flourishes. The internal battle ceases to be chaotic and becomes strategic. The inner battle also involves accepting that some falls will happen. And that's okay. You need to see each fall as training, not as failure. This change in perspective generates a solid identity shift. You realize that failure does not define anyone, persistence does. Each time you get up, you create consistent action and practice. And that consistency builds real emotional strength. One of the strongest challenges of the internal battle is learning to silence the voice of comfort. This voice promises undeserved rest, effortless pleasure, and an easy path without sacrifice. The person needs to know that this is an illusion. When they reject this voice, they activate relentless focus, and this focus aligns them with their real goals. Discomfort no longer seems like an enemy and becomes a sign of evolution. The inner battle also reveals that the mind is extremely trainable. People can shape their thoughts, train their impulses, and strengthen their decisions. They realize that self-discipline is developed like a muscle: resistance, repetition, effort. And over time, mental toughness becomes so natural that even they are surprised by their own strength. Identity shift is inevitable. When people win small internal battles, they begin to truly trust themselves. It is not that superficial confidence of ready-made phrases. It is confidence based on evidence, on seeing that they have fulfilled their own words. This strengthens relentless focus. When they look back and realize that they have overcome bad days, insecurities, and laziness, something awakens within them. I can do it. This feeling is transformative. The inner battle teaches that the mind can be a great guide or a terrible advisor. It is up to the person to decide which voice to obey. She learns to recognize when her thoughts are impulses, when they are fears, and when they are truths. This emotional filtering improves everything. She acts with consistent action, not impulsively. And this kind of maturity takes deep root in her identity. And as the person continues to evolve internally, they realize that this battle never ends. It just changes levels. With each improved version of themselves, new challenges arise. New internal parts need to be tamed. And it is precisely this constant silent war that paves the way for the next stage of the journey. Dealing with something that weighs more than the internal struggle, the regret of not trying. Regret is one of the heaviest burdens a person can carry. And the curious thing is that it only becomes apparent when there is not much left to do. It is that uncomfortable silence, that feeling of "I could have done more." And that burden hurts, because it shows everything the person left behind out of fear, laziness, or distraction. That is why relentless focus becomes so important. Life doesn't wait. Life moves forward, and those who don't keep up are stuck with regret. Regret doesn't come from bad decisions, but from decisions not made. It comes from, "I'll do it later. I'll start tomorrow. I'll try someday." This kind of thinking paralyzes. And when a person realizes the time lost, it's already too late. This is where the true value of self-discipline comes in. It prevents people from living in procrastination. It pushes them forward, even when their body wants to stay still. It is the key that unlocks the future before regret closes it. Many people fear the pain of effort, but forget that the pain of regret hurts more and lasts longer. The pain of effort is temporary. The pain of regret is permanent. And when people understand this, they activate a different, more mature, more conscious mental toughness. They realize that facing the present is easier than facing the what-ifs of the future. This realization creates a profound identity shift. They exchange escape for action. Regret is also an excellent teacher, but an expensive one. People learn by looking back and seeing that every minute could have been better spent. To avoid repeating this story, they need consistent action. Not huge action, not perfect action, constant action. It's like reading 5 pages a day, saving 50 reais a week, training for 20 minutes. Small things prevent big regrets, and small actions create big changes without them realizing it. It's easy to imagine the ideal future, but difficult to build that future when you're constantly seeking emotional comfort. But regret arises precisely from this trade-off. You choose momentary pleasure and lose lasting results. When you realize this, something inside you calls for relentless focus. It's a call to start over, to not repeat patterns, so that the future isn't a collection of "I lack courage." A simple way to avoid regret is to ask questions that provoke truth. If I die tomorrow, will I be proud of how I live today? Am I honoring my potential? Does my routine represent the life I want? These questions are provocative, but they build clarity, and clarity strengthens self-discipline. People begin to act with more intention, cut out excesses, and avoid delays. Life gains direction, and that direction eliminates the space where regret usually arises. And as they learn to do what needs to be done, even without desire, they begin to realize that the fear of regret hurts less than the pain of missing opportunities. This understanding ignites something within them, something that prepares them for the next big challenge, to stop justifying themselves and finally take ownership of their own power. Because regret is not the end. It is just the strongest warning that something needs to change before it is too late. Life has never been fair, and you realize this when you look around and see people succeeding without complaining while others collect excuses. It is in this contrast that relentless focus is born. The awareness that complaining does not pay bills, does not create opportunities, does not change destiny. When you accept this, self-discipline begins to guide your decisions. The world respects movement, not justifications, and hard work becomes an internal compass that always points toward progress. The truth is simple. Excuses are comfortable. Hard work is uncomfortable, and that is precisely why it transforms. Every time a person chooses to act, even when they are tired, they train their mental toughness. This mental training is worth more than any passing motivation. Over time, they realize that their life improves in proportion to their effort, not their intentions. And every act of consistent action makes their self-confidence grow solidly. When people abandon excuses, they see that most of them were built on fear, laziness, and self-sabotage. It's a shock, but a liberating one. They understand that no excuse leads to the next level. To grow, they need to get their hands dirty, face challenges, and go through real discomfort. It is this confrontation that causes a strong identity shift, one that changes posture, speech, and behavior. Hard work reveals the version of themselves that was hidden. They also realize that results don't come to those who wait, but to those who insist. If she wants to learn something, she studies every day. If she wants to improve her physique, she trains even on bad days. If she wants more money, she develops new skills and exposes herself to opportunities. Books like The One Thing or Atomic Habits help a lot in this process. Small actions repeated with consistent action create an avalanche of progress, and that avalanche destroys any old excuses. Excuses are easy to collect because they make a person seem like a victim and, at the same time, innocent. But hard work makes a person seem responsible, and that scares those who don't want to face their own potential. When they choose to work hard, even without recognition, they strengthen their mental toughness and relentless focus. It doesn't matter what happened in the past. What matters is what they do now. The future respects those who move forward. Life rewards those who show up every day, not those who show up only when they are motivated. When people understand this, they begin to act more firmly. They realize that no one is watching, but they are, and that is enough. This kind of awareness naturally deepens their self-discipline. With each task accomplished, she proves to herself that she doesn't need perfect conditions to grow. And this internal proof strengthens her identity shift like never before. And as she continues on her journey, she begins to realize that hard work is less about sweat and more about who she is becoming. Excuses fall away, habits improve, and her vision clears. And at that very point, when her focus is sharp and her mindset strengthened, the next inevitable challenge arises, facing the harsh truth of time and regret, something that is about to shape her journey even more profoundly. Success has never been an isolated event, but rather a lifestyle that needs to be cultivated every day. It arises when a person understands that there is no finish line. Each goal achieved opens the way for a new one. This mindset creates a relentless focus that separates those who want from those who do. The person begins to see success not as something external, but as part of who they become. This understanding awakens self-discipline in every choice. And every choice shapes their future in a quiet but powerful way. Living success as a lifestyle means no longer acting only when it is convenient. People commit themselves even on days when everything seems difficult. This commitment requires mental toughness, the inner strength that keeps them going even without immediate reward. They discover that true success lies in the process, not in the applause. And this generates consistent action regardless of mood. This constant movement fuels a profound identity shift, where they see themselves as someone who simply does not stop. Those who live success daily learn to align habits with goals. There is no inconsistency. What they do matches what they want. She takes care of her body, mind, and choices because she understands that everything is connected. Reading 10 pages a day, sleeping better, training, studying, improving communication. Everything becomes part of the foundation. This is where relentless focus becomes natural, because each habit helps the others. Self-discipline ceases to be an effort and becomes a style. And this style sustains her journey even on gray days. Success as a lifestyle also involves protecting the surrounding environment. People learn that there's no point in wanting to grow if they are surrounded by people who don't want to go anywhere. They begin to better select their conversations, content, friendships, and priorities. This filtering requires mental toughness, because sometimes it involves saying no to old habits and old companions. But this movement creates high-quality, consistent action. And with that, the identity shift deepens even further. Living this way also brings a different kind of calm. People no longer need to prove anything to anyone. They are committed only to their own evolution. This tranquility is not passive, it is strategic. It allows them to maintain relentless focus without getting lost in the noise of the world. And the more they respect their own pace, the more discipline flourishes. Self-discipline becomes a sign of maturity, not rigidity. It is at this stage that success becomes natural, almost inevitable. Another important point is that those who experience success on a daily basis accept that they will fail, and fail a lot. Only now they fail forward. Every mistake becomes a learning experience. Each stumble becomes an adjustment. This attitude creates a mental toughness that is rare to find. The person understands that success does not require perfection. It requires persistence. That is why consistent action continues even on bad days. And this consistency turns mistakes into fuel for their identity shift. And as they move forward, they realize that living success as a lifestyle is actually liberating. They no longer need to wait for big events, big achievements, or big signs. Everything is already happening in small acts, small habits, small decisions. This creates such a clear direction that the next step in this journey comes naturally. A step that will require facing not only the outside world, but also the inner voice that often wants to sabotage the path. You've made it this far, and that already puts you ahead of 95% of people, because most give up before they even discover what they're truly capable of. But not you. You're not here by chance. Something inside you knows that you were born to break boundaries, to challenge your own history, to break patterns that keep millions stuck in the same old life. You felt that this content touches something deep, almost forgotten, the strongest version that exists within you. Now, let me ask you something directly, without beating around the bush. Are you going to continue living as a spectator? Or are you going to take on the leading role in your own life? Because the truth is simple and brutal. Nothing changes until you change. Nothing transforms until you transform. And if you've reached the end of this audiobook, it's because there's already a fire inside you. A fire that no longer accepts excuses, laziness, or emotional weakness. So take a deep breath and understand this once and for all. The world will never give you permission to win. You are the one who takes it. You are the one who decides. You are the one who creates. If you apply 10% of what you've learned here, your life will take a totally different direction. But if you apply 100%, my friend, the person you'll be in 6 months will look at you in the mirror and thank you for not waiting another day. Now, before you leave, I want you to make a choice. A simple choice, but one that separates those who only consume content from those who really change their lives. Subscribe to the channel now. Turn on notifications. And come back here every time your mind tries to sabotage you. Here you will find direction when everything seems confusing. You will find strength when your motivation runs out. You will find strategy when the world tries to distract you. And most importantly, you will find a different community. People like you, who want to win, grow, and truly transform themselves. If you want to keep evolving without falling back, if you want to keep your focus sharp, your mind strong, and your discipline at the top, then this is the right place. It's not just a regular channel. It's a commitment. It's a pact with your best self. The decision is right there in front of you. And deep down, you already know what you need to do.